Good morning, world. Welcome to another episode of Xendependently Minded. If you are a new or returning listener, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you like this podcast and you want to hear more combat sports news, analysis, and discussions, stay tuned because it's only going to get bigger and better from here. And make sure you share Xendependently Minded with everybody that you know, everyone that you love, respect, and care for, because it's only the best podcast out there. So this is the first this is the first combat sports podcast I've done in a couple weeks. I didn't do one last weekend. I was going to do one, but I forgot, or I ran out of time, didn't really have enough time to do it, and there wasn't really much to talk about because there were no fights. But in that week, there's been a good amount of news and a lot to talk about. So I'm excited to talk again, to do another episode, and just kind of get some feedback from you guys on... and just your thoughts on the things I'm going to talk about. So obviously, like always, I'm going to do a whole analysis and prediction for the main card for this fight night. The main event, of course, is Marvin Vettori and Kevin Holland. Before I get to that, though, I wanted to just kind of give my thoughts and my humble opinion on a couple other things that have been kind of in the forefront of combat sports news. So Jorge Masvidal, obviously, Everybody knows that at UFC 261, Jorge Masvidal is getting his rematch against Kamaru Usman. And a lot of people are upset with this. And I understand where a lot of people are coming from. And a lot of people are saying, or they're claiming, I actually do think that you're a liar if you act like you're not excited for this fight. Because just what I've noticed is Jorge Masvidal in 2019, he exploded. His star shone so bright in 2019 because he had, he's 3-0 that year. He had 3 knockouts, and, he had the fastest knockout in UFC history against Ben Askren. He knocked out Darren Till in Darren Till's home country. And then he beat the crap out of Nate Diaz, who's a fan favorite and a really tough, durable guy. So he exploded onto the scene, became really popular. There were talks about him fighting for the title, defending the BMF belt, fighting Conor McGregor even, I saw. He just, he really blew up and he really exploded in popularity. And then the election came around and he was a lot more vocal on politics than he usually was. And a lot of people began to underrate him from then on. And it's super disrespectful in my opinion. And I'm not trying to be a hypocrite here because when I first started this podcast, I'm not going to, I've really grown as an MMA fan and a combat sports fan since I first started because I've always respected everybody who was in combat sports, but I've learned to have a concrete bit of respect for people who step into a cage or a ring and fight because it's a tough sport and it's not for everybody and it's for a special breed of human. But, early on, you can go back to my old podcasts. I haven't deleted them or anything. I wasn't the biggest Jorge Masvidal fan. He flew under the radar for most people. And I know so many people out there were like, oh, I've liked him since the beginning. I highly doubt it. Unless you've been watching the UFC since UFC 1, which not a lot of people have. He flew under a lot of people's radar, including mine. I never disrespected him. I did always consider him a gatekeeper when I first started doing this podcast. But like I said, my respect for all fighters has grown. And I've learned to be a fan of everybody in the sport of boxing and MMA. And then, of course, there are the guys that I am bigger fans of. But just the amount of disrespect and the amount, of underratedness, if that's a word, that Jorge Masvidal has received recently, just because people need to grow up. That's all I'm going to say. Straight up, people need to grow up and stop acting like Jorge Masvidal is just some pushover because he's not. The dude's a veteran. He's got underrated boxing. He's really violent coming out of the clinch. I'm going to talk a lot more about his skill set the Friday before UFC 261, of course, when I break down that entire card. But Jorge Masvidal is not a pushover, and this is not going to be an easy fight. Anybody who claims it's going to be an easy fight for either guy is lying, or they're a casual. They don't know what they're talking about. People need to grow up and appreciate athletes for what they are, which is an athlete. You do not have to care or listen to anything that any athlete says that's not related to their sport. You don't have to listen to Jorge Masvidal's political spiel. You don't have to watch his conferences and his I think he founded or he led some what do you call it? Just some kind of, I think it's a group called Latinos for Trump or something like that. You don't have to listen to that. You don't have to ignore it. It's the internet. Nobody's forcing you to listen to it. If you're a fan of him, then watch his fights. If you're a fan of the sport, don't disrespect a pioneer. I shouldn't say pioneer, but a guy that's been there and he's done that. Don't just stop disrespecting Jorge Masvidal. It's ridiculous. And I'm not coming out and saying and predicting that Jorge is going to knock out Usman, but I don't want to spoil my opinion and my analysis and prediction, but I'm definitely going to do a little bit more of a breakdown when it comes closer to UFC 261. But people just need to chill. Jorge Masvidal's a gangster. He's been around for a long time, and don't sleep on him. That's all I'm going to say on that. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the news that Leon Edwards and Nate Diaz have agreed to fight. I believe it's at UFC 260. I think it's at 262. I think because Nate Diaz was saying something about the new lightweight champion's going to be crowned then, and then always to remember that that's his division or whatever, which is funny. But that's going to be a fun fight. And I'm excited for Leon because he's finally going to get the respect that he deserves. Because like I said in the past, with Leon Edwards, I've never been a big fan of him either. Because, his personality is a little bland. And also, I was just really frustrated with the welterweight division because every single guy in like the top 7 was tweeting. Every day they would tweet. One or the other would tweet, "Oh, sign the dotted line." And then when the reports came out, neither guy had signed the dotted line, or the person talking the most trash wasn't signing the dotted line, and it was really annoying. But I'm really happy that Leon Edwards was able to recover from the coronavirus because he got a bad case of it. I think I read a report that said he lost like 20 pounds overnight, either from sweating or puking or whatever. And it's scary. It's a scary thing. And to see someone that's so athletic and just a freak of nature like him, getting beat down by this disease, it's pretty crazy. And I'm happy that he was able to come back and get a fight. He did fight Bilal Muhammad. He was piecing him up, and I do think he was going to eventually finish him. But, we all know how that fight ended. But I'm glad that he's getting a quick turnaround fight against a big name that will get him big respect if he does beat him. And when that comes closer, of course, I'm going to break that down like I always do. And also, it's fun to see Nate Diaz fight. The Diaz brothers carry a big fan base, and that being said, this is a lot of exposure. It'll be a really exciting and, big opportunity for either guy to win. I'm not saying Nate Diaz will get a title shot after one win, but definitely he'll be closer to being a contender for sure. And yeah, I'm excited about that one. I'm really excited for the next 3 or 4 months of UFC specifically. Boxing again is falling back into obscurity. I got excited a little too ahead of myself because boxing media tricked me into thinking that the Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua fight was, I don't know what's going on here. I want to know whether the fight has been agreed on or not. I'm like with the UFC. I could care less if so-and-so DM'd Sean Shelby or Dana White about this fight because that doesn't mean anything unless the actual fight is agreed on by both parties and there's an official date and venue. And with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, they need to fight each other. These are the 2 best heavyweights in the world. And now we got Andy Ruiz possibly fighting Deontay Wilder, and then we saw Dillian White make some great adjustments and knock out Alexander Povetkin. So we need this fight to happen. Tyson Fury is the best heavyweight in the world. In my opinion, he's one of the best pound-for-pound boxers in the world. And, he's been out for 14 months because they haven't gotten a fight for him. And it's ridiculous because him and Anthony Joshua need to fight. That'll be an all-time great. And I'm sure, I think I read that I don't know if it was signed pen to paper, but they did agree to fight. And now there's a deadline coming up on where the venue is. I'm like, Who cares where the venue is? Why should it matter? Unless it goes overseas and it's like a big time difference, like, and that affects the fighters. But come on, we need to see these guys fight. The fight's gonna sell. It'll be a really big fight because it's heavyweights and it's two really big names in boxing. Besides that, I mean, there are a lot. I've been watching a lot of boxing, but there are, the people, the best fighters in the world are not fighting each other. Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford they should have fought last year, the year before. They should be fighting tomorrow, but they're not. And it's one of the reasons why boxing is falling out of, like, their popularity is plummeting down the toilet. One thing I always look back to it was such a exciting and revolutionary moment when Canelo was supposed to be fighting, who was he fighting? He was fighting Kovalev. He was fighting Kovalev. He was moving up to light heavyweight, which was a big deal. When he fought Sergey Kovalev, they had to delay that fight because they didn't want to lose viewers because the BMF fight was on. And the idea that this crazy sport that is not even that, it's a young sport. It only started a little over 20 years ago. The idea that such a crazy sport like MMA, that, boxing has been around for a long time, but when you put on lighter gloves, you throw in knees, kicks, elbows, all that kind of stuff, wrestling, it's a crazy thing. John McCain, who was a prominent political figure, he was trying to outlaw MMA. He was trying to outlaw the UFC, which is crazy. And the fact that boxing, up until the UFC gained serious popularity in the early 2010s, boxing was boxing was king. And just that famous picture of Canelo and Kovalev, like, sitting in the back. I think Canelo's laying on a couch waiting for that fight to end. They delayed this massive boxing fight that has millions and millions of dollars in sponsorships and, boxing political figures behind it. Since they delayed that for Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz, and that was a big deal, and it was really cool. And then also, I think the first major boxing event that got held during the pandemic when it first started last year, had 5,000 viewers, like, at its peak. And then Joe Rogan talking in a Fight Companion about fights gets more live streams than that. It gets like 10,000 more. It gets like 10 times more live streams than that. So yeah, boxing needs to get their stuff together, seriously, because it wasn't even that long ago. Thinking back to the 90s and the late 80s, obviously I wasn't around, but just looking back and seeing, like, the four horsemen of the apocalypse: Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Marvin Hagler, and Roberto Duran, all fighting each other. You would never see that today. You don't see Terrence Crawford, Manny Pacquiao, Errol Spence all fighting each other. I guess you could throw in, what's his name? Keith Thurman. We're not seeing these guys all fight each other. We saw Pacquiao and Keith Thurman fight, which I think that was like 2 years ago. Maybe a year and a half ago. It felt like a long time ago. We're not seeing that happen today. And that's the reason why boxing is just second place as far as viewerships and pay-per-view records and stuff like that. So yeah, as far as boxing goes, there's not really any big news there. There aren't enough big name fights for me to talk about, really. Yeah, that's I'm just gonna put it plainly like that. But so that all aside, let's get to the main card for this fight night. So it's actually a pretty underrated fight night. It's really solid, actually. It could be kind of a weaker pay-per-view if it was a pay-per-view. I would still watch it. I watch every single UFC card. But so starting off on the main card, we have Mike Perry fighting Daniel Rodriguez. So I usually, when I talk about someone who's a fan favorite, obviously I call them a fan favorite. When it comes to Mike Perry, it's like, I don't know what a fan unfavorite. I don't really know. Not a lot of people like Mike Perry, and there are reasons for that. I'm not going to get into them. But yeah, Mike Perry is 29 years old. He looks a lot older because of, I don't know. I'm not trying to be mean here, but I did not know he was 29 years old. He's pretty young, but he's fighting Daniel Rodriguez. Daniel Rodriguez is 13-2, and he's lost once in the UFC to Nicholas Dalby in his last time out at 255. That was a decision loss. I did think that Daniel won that fight, but, it happens. Decisions happen. Bad decisions could go, they happen all the time. Not every bad decision is a robbery. Something that fans need to understand when they call every close fight a robbery. But so Daniel Rodriguez, he's got jiu-jitsu skills. He's got a submission and a knockout and a couple decision wins. But I do think as annoying as Mike Perry is as a person, he did look pretty good when he fought Mickey Gall. So we know that on the ground he's not as bad as he looks. So this could be an interesting fight, but I do think it's going to be a slow fight. I couldn't really see Daniel Rodriguez going for the kill, trying to knock Mike Perry out, but I do think Mike Perry could come in with a chip on his shoulder. He has been going through, he's had a couple out of the octagon issues that could fuel him to come out with a newfound purpose and just come out with an energy that maybe the energy we saw him carry when he fought Mickey Gall. So I am predicting Mike Perry is going to win. I think he's going to win by decision and potential fireworks. That's all I'm going to say. So the next fight on this card, we have Nina Nunes. I just read that she's going to be introduced as Nina Nunes because that's Amanda Nunes' wife. I think this is her first fight since her kid was born. I don't think she fought in 2020, so that'll be exciting. But Nina is an underrated strawweight fighter because she's never been finished in her entire, I think she's been in the UFC for 7 years. She's never been finished, and, she doesn't finish a lot of people either. She has, I think, one finish in her entire career, but it was a submission. So she's pretty good. She's a pretty good fighter on the ground. She has this, the submission threat is there, but she's fighting Mackenzie Dern. And Mackenzie Dern is a really exciting prospect making her way up the ranks. Her only loss in the UFC, and actually in her entire MMA career, was to Amanda Hebus, who is another fan favorite, who's a really solid jiu-jitsu fighter. But we did see Amanda get knocked out. That's a topic for another discussion. But Mackenzie's got some serious jiu-jitsu too. She has, I think, half of her UFC wins come by way of submission. So we could see some high-level grappling here, which I'm really excited for because I do appreciate grappling, especially when it's high-level grappling. Like, something I was really excited for was Ben Askren and Damian Maia. I wanted to see how Ben Askren did against a great grappler because the only two guys he had fought was Robbie Lawler, who's not a great grappler, and Jorge Masvidal, who not a great grappler either. And, we all know what happened with those two fights, but we ended up seeing him strike more than we wanted, and then eventually Damian Maia submitted Ben, so that's that. But this is going to be a really exciting grappling fight, I think. And I'm not really quite too sure where to lean here because Nina has a lot of experience, and nobody's attempted to submit Nina while she's been in the UFC, so we'll see what happens here. I do think Mackenzie is going to try to submit her, and I'm not sure if she's going to be able to pull it off, but definitely she's going to land takedowns and just kind of control the fight from there. Like I said, I don't think Mackenzie's going to be able to officially submit Nina, but I believe we will see 2 or 3 submission attempts, and maybe she will land one. I could be wrong, but I do think Mackenzie's going to just out-grapple and out-wrestle Nina and win by decision. So moving on to the next fight, third fight in the card, we have Smiling Sam Alvey fighting Julian Marquez in the middleweight division. So Sam Alvey is a fan favorite, I think. I definitely like to watch him fight. I love, his kind of outgoing, bubbly, extrovert personality, but he is coming up to, he could be fighting in potentially his last UFC fight. He's been in an unfortunate stretch his last 5 fights, so he was on a 4-loss streak, and then his last fight out was a draw. So Sam Alvey could be in I don't want to say panic mode because he's got too much experience. He's too much of a veteran to come out crazy. But we could definitely see a more urgent Sam Alvey. And he's fighting Julian Marquez, of course, like I said earlier. Julian is, he's kind of young in his fighting career. He's only had 10 fights, as opposed to Sam Alvey's, was that 40? He's got 48 fights. So obviously the experience advantage is going to go to Sam. But Julian also, he's coming off of a submission win just a little bit over a month and a half ago. And before that, he hadn't fought in almost 3 years. He lost in the Ultimate Fighter, and then he came back after almost 3 years and then got a submission win. So we could be seeing kind of a career restart for him, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think he's just going to come in more hungry. I think Sam Alvey is just, he's on the decline. We've seen it. He, like I said, draw in his last fight and then 4 losses before that. And I think 2 of those 4 losses were by knockout. And then the fight before that draw against Ryan Spann, we saw him, I swear, when he got stuck in that arm triangle when they were standing up against the cage, I swear it looked like he went out. His eyes got wide, and I bet you the lights turned off for a second or two. But he was able to make it through and then still lose to decision, or by decision. So I do think Julian is going to come in. He's just a lot more hungry, and he's ready to try to make a name for himself in this kind of weak and bleak middleweight division. So I think Julian's going to come in. I think he's going to knock out Sam in the second round. So coming up to the co-main event is a really exciting fight between 2 featherweights. Two featherweights that are really on the rise. We have Sodiq Yusuff versus Arnold Allen. So this is a pivotal fight for the featherweight division, definitely. I think these 2 guys could break out into the top 5 with 1 or 2, possibly, I guess if it's like really crowded, 3 wins up into the top 5 of the featherweight division, because Arnold Allen is number 10, I think, in the featherweight rankings, and Sodiq is 11. So these are kind of almost cream of the crop for the featherweight division, which really stacked featherweight division, I have to add here. And both guys are undefeated in the UFC. Both guys only have 1 loss in their entire professional mixed martial arts career. So here's what's going to happen. In my opinion, I think we're going to see really high IQ and really high class, high level striking, because Arnold Allen has a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, but that purple belt, a lot of people might sleep on his submission skills, but they shouldn't, because he's got a few submission wins and he's actively looking for submissions when the fight does go to the ground. But he also has loads of knockouts, and he's also undefeated in his kickboxing and boxing career. I think he did both of those amateur, and he has like 3 wins in each sport. So the guy has really solid striking, and he's also, the threat of the submission is always lingering when you're fighting Arnold Allen. So he has that playing towards his advantage. And then Sodiq is a guy that, like I said, only has 1 loss in his entire MMA career, and that was by knockout. It was before he got to the UFC. And then since then, he's just basically been outstriking every single opponent he has. So, like I said, we're going to see some fireworks in this one for sure. But I do think Arnold Allen's kind of small. I don't want to say small as in a bad way, but the threat of Arnold Allen shooting for a takedown and throwing Sodiq off of his striking rhythm is there. And I think that's ultimately what Arnold is probably going to do, is toss in a takedown attempt every once in a while. And if he does get Sodiq to the ground, he has the grappling advantage, and we could see him submit Sodiq, or at least attempt. But I think he's going to use the threat of the takedown to get Sodiq to open up and then eventually land something over top, or an uppercut maybe while Sodiq tries to stuff the takedown. But I think Arnold is going to throw in a couple takedowns, get Sodiq second guessing, and I think he's going to knock him out in the second round. So moving on to the main event. This is a fight that we didn't really know we were going to get until just recently, because it was originally Marvin Vettori and Darren Till, which was a really exciting and pivotal fight. because either one of those guys between Darren Till and Marvin Vettori could be getting a title shot. It's Israel Adesanya's choice, of course, because he's middleweight champion, but I don't think if Kevin Holland wins, he's going to get a title shot. But Marvin Vettori, we very well could see him get a rematch against Israel Adesanya and fight for the title soon. But obviously, Kevin Holland is a G. He just lost about a month ago to Derek Brunson. Yeah, actually, less than a month ago, he lost to Derek Brunson. But, Derek didn't do too much damage to him, so he didn't get a medical suspension, I don't think at all. Or if he did, it was very little. So he was able to step up and fight against a dangerous guy in Marvin Vettori. So, obviously, Kevin Holland has some jiu-jitsu skills, but his striking, I think, is his real strength. I think Travis Lutter would allude to the fact that his submission skills are probably more dangerous, but I think his striking is really underrated. And especially his from a pure boxing standpoint, he's got some really solid, his range and his range management and his ability to land precise and powerful and quick shots with that reach advantage that he has over almost everybody it's really underrated. I'm not saying that he threw the fight against Derek Brunson. Derek Brunson beat him. He was able to hold him down and just basically control the fight for 5 rounds. But when they were on the feet, Kevin Holland was able to land some damaging shots and some shots that stunned Derek Brunson. So on the feet, Kevin Holland is really solid. We saw him do a Philly shell roll like Floyd Mayweather, which is crazy because, Philly shell is already an advanced technique when it comes to boxing. And to do it in the UFC is so dangerous because, with boxing, if a shot is landed and you don't roll it off the shoulder, if you know what I'm talking about with the Philly shell technique, it's holding the lead arm down, tucking your chin, and holding your shoulder up so you can roll shots off of your shoulders and then roll to your rear arm, your rear hand, and then block hooks and stuff like that. I can't really put it into words, but just watch Floyd Mayweather's defensive fighting style and you'll see. It's really dangerous to do that technique anyways, but with small gloves, in boxing, if someone lands a shot and you miss the shoulder roll, you can just eat the shot if it's not super precise or right on the chin or just hits you in the nose or whatever. But with those little gloves, there's potential to cut and knock anybody out. And we saw Kevin Holland, he's a risky guy. He likes to play around. He likes to talk trash. And it's just a fun fighting style. And definitely Marvin Vettori, he's like the most aggressive non-steroid user I've ever seen in the UFC. The dude is always mad. And we've seen him in the past just he's like the Juggernaut in X-Men. He's just banging his head against the cage wall. And he's just an aggressive, just manly man. And he's a really good wrestler. And his last time out, we saw him dominate Jack Hermanson, who's another really dangerous middleweight. Before that, we saw him submit Carl Roberson. He's on a tear. He hasn't lost since he fought Israel Adesanya, and he's improved a lot since then. And that being said, Marvin Vettori, dangerous wrestler. Kevin Holland, saw what happened when he fought Derek Brunson, who's another strong wrestler recently. So, obviously, of course, Marvin Vettori is the favorite coming into this fight, and especially looking at the fact that I don't think he's ever been knocked out. I think he has 4 losses and a draw on his record, and all of them are by decision. So he's got a tough chin, and he's just really hard to finish. We've never seen him get finished in his 21 fight professional career. So, but if there's anybody who's able to do it by strikes or even by submission, it's Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland has really good jiu-jitsu skills. Obviously, he's a black belt. He got his black belt from Travis Lutter, who's a really, really good coach, and he was a good, solid former fighter too. So I can see Kevin Holland playing it. He's got a really big reach advantage over Marvin, of course. Marvin's kind of a stumpier guy, and Kevin is really long and lanky, and that's why I think his striking is so dangerous, and he can if he turns it on at any point, he has the strength and the precision to knock anybody out in the entire middleweight division. So I'm really excited for this one, and I don't think it's going to be so cut and dry as to Marvin Vettori needs to take Kevin Holland down and submit him. It's, Kevin definitely, I mean, it was really funny when Dana White basically just chalked up Holland's loss to Derek Brunson to he had a mental breakdown. It just didn't look like he was serious. It was really weird because he had me fooled. Like, going into the 4th and 5th round, after we saw Kevin rock Derek Brunson, I think in the 3rd or 4th, I was like, all right, the dude's just like playing with this prey. He's just messing with him. He's going to turn it on and he's going to finish Derek. Because we saw him just all of a sudden for 10 seconds get serious, start striking, and then was able to hurt Brunson badly. I thought it was going to finish him, and he didn't. So I think that was kind of a sobering loss for him. And, he said it was embarrassing. A lot of people were clowning on him. So that's definitely going to have him coming out a lot more dialed in and focused. So this is more of a close fight than the odds show and that the fans are leading on to, in my humble opinion. So this is a really tough one for me to pick because Marvin is at the top of his game, and like I said, I do think Kevin is coming in with the chip on his shoulder. So it's going to be a hard one, but I'm going to make a crazy prediction and predict that Kevin Holland is going to knock out Marvin Vettori in the 3rd round. I think Marvin is going to try and even successfully wrestle Kevin Holland a bunch, but he's not going to be able to finish him with ground and pound, and he's going to wear himself out. And I think Kevin, if he hasn't already, he will get into Marvin's head and kind of mentally mess with him and then get him to, not abandon the game plan, but do a little too much and kind of blow his load a little early and get tired. So, yeah, that's my crazy prediction. I think Kevin is going to start picking him apart in the 3rd round and then knock Marvin out. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Xendependently Minded. Don't forget to check out my Xendependent news segments, which are usually posted every Monday or Tuesday. I'm having a lot of fun with those, and I hope you guys are too. And if there's any feedback or criticisms you can give me, let me know. I think you can send me a voice message through Anchor. Go follow me on Twitter, find me on Instagram, Facebook page, comment anywhere, or even on YouTube. I almost forgot about YouTube. It's posted. I try to post it everywhere, so if you have any kind of feedback or tips or advice or criticisms, let me know. And, of course, as always, stay safe, stay away from those crazies, and thank you.